Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for an introduction to Eos Cortex 365, the project history solution for the small and mid-size AEC market. Today's event is presented by Eos Group. Before we launch into the main presentation, I'd like to go over just a few brief housekeeping items. First, today's event will be about an hour long, and we will be recording it. We will email you a link to the archived recording so you can view the presentation again or share it with a colleague. Please disable your pop-up blockers to ensure you have no trouble viewing the slides or media viewer for the demonstration. This is an interactive event. Feel free to submit questions using the chat box on your screen. We also encourage you to tweet throughout the event. Use the handle @EosGroup or hashtag Cortex365. If you would like to enlarge your slides, you may do so by dragging the corner of the box. This function allows you to make them larger or smaller. All the widgets are also resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around and to get the most out of your desktop space. Please take a moment to visit our Resource Center. The box is on your console. Here you can access a number of resources that you might find helpful. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar that I haven't covered, clear your cache and refresh your link to refresh your console. If that doesn't work, please feel free to reach out using the Q&A box. Finally, at the end of this event, we will present you with a survey. Please take a few minutes to fill it out and let us know your thoughts on today's event. For today's webinar, we have Tony Colburn presenting. Tony has been working in the AEC industry for over 30 years, and he is Eos Group's lead specialist on Eos Cortex. We'd like to warmly welcome Tony and dive right into Cortex 365.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, everybody, for making some time in your day. Before getting started, I would like to provide a little background on Eos Group. We started this company 25 years ago as a technology and professional services organization with a focus on pre-con solutions for the AEC and owner market. During that time, we've developed several software applications to support our clients, both commercial off-the-shelf solutions as well as custom. We also partner with multiple core and complementary construction and cost engineering solutions and organizations. So, in addition to our software design and development team, our services team is made up of estimators, project managers, and professional engineers with over 2,000 successful implementations. Eos actually is a word, it's not an acronym. So Eos is the Greek goddess of dawn, little mythology background for us here today. And so let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. For estimating and project controls professionals in small, medium-sized firms, we know Excel may be your weapon of choice, and also probably estimating pre-construction or project control solutions as well. And while powerful, construction and engineering industry is making progress moving away from spreadsheets to represent the final price, at least. And while it's perfectly acceptable to assist with calculating estimated costs, perhaps for parts of the process or analytics, final pricing, it may not be the optimal solution for the usual reasons of security. We don't want that estimate history walking out the door, or difficulty in applying global factoring, such as markups, normalizations, and escalations, and so forth, through to collaboration, such as sharing your content or merging it, lack of integration, you name it, can be error prone and so forth. Still, estimating cost data is likely available in those Excel workbooks. And so they're a valuable asset and for your organization, in addition to estimating and project control systems, can be leveraged to develop that cost history database. Certainly, the degree of consistency across those sources will be a major factor in establishing a cost history database, therefore taking you across that digital divide. And so this is sort of the difference between structured and unstructured data. and we know time is money. And in this case, with a structured cost history database, companies can put a strategy around the management and use of their data and ultimately preparing them for machine learning and artificial intelligence. Of course, the concept of using your project history is nothing new. Seasoned professionals use experience every day to make decisions. Industry process and organizational management standards generally refer to this as expert judgment. And if bias is addressed properly, certainly a useful resource for project history to benchmark or perform conceptual and early stage estimates, perform trend analysis across the organization. But making that information widely accessible, quickly, in a trustworthy way is often a challenge. So organizations such as the Association for Advancement of Cost Engineering, the ACE, Project Management Institute, or PMI, other professional standards, activity-based costing, or ERP, certainly refer to this throughout their entire processes. You'll probably be relieved to know I'm not going to walk you through any process diagrams today, but I'm only showing them to represent that throughout these bodies of knowledge, you will find history referenced, both in the use of it through your processes, whether that be asset planning and management, project planning and management, using those together in tandem throughout the processes. They're pervasive through the chapters. They're pervasive through any of the processes that they've indicated. But use of the data and creating a project history database and managing a project history database are two separate things, and it's easy to focus on the application of that history. And so what we found is it's really, not that it's not possible without a management system, but the collection and storage of project history can be very difficult. So back to our Excel discussion, it can be very cumbersome or require a specialized individual or data scientist type of person to establish a history database that's simple, it's easy to collect the data, it's managed consistently throughout your organization. So I want to make a note of the importance of developing those standards, the planning for that data, both of qualitative and quantitative information, as well as procedural information, is to the entire process. So in summary, there are two main areas here we're going to focus on. That's using your history throughout the pre-construction, project execution phases, as well as the development and maintenance of a project history database. So that brings us to Cortex 365, and building on the vision and success of its predecessor, our flagship product, which is simply called Cortex Project History. Cortex 365 is designed for the small and mid-sized AEC market. Can also be used for teams within larger organizations, perhaps as a proof of concept or as a tool internally. Cortex 365 really embodies the basic capabilities of a project history system. Again, we're trying to use that for benchmarking, conceptual estimating, trends throughout your organization. But it has the goal of speeding the implementation process and making that information accessible to as many users as you like, doing that economically and consistently. So what we've done is envisioned a product that runs on a browser, and any internet browser out there, Internet Explorer, Chrome, can be used. We host the data on our Microsoft Azure environment, which is secure and uses your company's logins actually to authenticate users. Prior to Cortex 365, as I mentioned, we released our flagship history product, which is Cortex Project History. It's designed for enterprise organizations, and while 365 has been developed to provide these capabilities for smaller firms, I wanted to outline some of the high-level differences. If it becomes apparent over time that the 365 group wants to move to an enterprise solution, that migration is very easy and can be done. But let's go through some of those high-level features. We have a limitation on the number of projects, the number of attributes or project characteristics that you can define, the import sources For example, in 365, it's just Excel, whereas in the enterprise solution, we have tightly coupled integrations with upstream and downstream systems. So those are important changes. Probably one of the other differences is that the element or the cost structure that you choose in Cortex 365 would be limited to one of those, whether that's a standard library such as CSI's master format or uniformat, or an internal cost structure. Much more detailed matrix of the differences of those systems has been provided for you in the resources window of your console, so you can access that. And certainly if you have any questions about that, we're more than happy to help afterwards. Wanted to go into the investment itself. The software is a $5,000 annual subscription. With that, you get a single administrator license, which can effectively do anything in the system, as well as change the configuration, invite users, so on and so forth. And unlimited users can access the system and use it as what we call inquiry users. And those are read-only type of licenses. So that would be the bulk of your user community. There's a $3,000 one-time implementation and setup fee that includes 2 comprehensive training sessions, an initial session that will introduce you to the software, how it runs, some of the things to consider as you configure it, as well as a final administrator training where we get into the real nuts and bolts of how to manage your cost history database. In between those 2 events are ad hoc reviews and web meetings to assist you with configuring and publishing your content. With that, I'd like to jump into the demonstration. And Madeline, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and let me know when you can see it. This usually takes a couple seconds here.
It looks like we're all set.
Very good. Thank you. What you're seeing right now is the Cortex 365 home screen, and across the top are some of the global capabilities here, menus, icons to navigate through the various areas of the system, keyword search box, clipboard, favorites, and so forth. This bar is visible throughout the system. The homepage is personalized to a degree. As you can see, it's welcome me by name. It's showing me in the first row here projects that I've recently viewed, those that I've recently published, those similar to those that I've viewed. And that similar recommendation there is 365's, classify that as a toehold in the world of machine learning and also artificial intelligence, but preparing you for that by, again, contributing to a project history system with a consistent structure. That makes it possible for you to do a lot of things downstream, whether that's reporting with other tools such as Tableau, Power BI, even just Access or Excel can be used as well. Hovering over any of these tiles will provide additional information. These are maybe your key attributes that you'd like to bubble up to the top, location, size, so on and so forth. So as I hover through those, I can get some immediate information on them. Clicking on any one of the tiles will open the single project view. And the single project view is nice. You've got your attributes, your cost elements, feature that will plot the project on its location in the map. As you can see, we have also an information panel, and that information panel will allow you to attach small images and scroll through those for nice presentations, as well as, again, those high-level attributes, pie chart with some cost structure, and again, down at the bottom, a reference to projects that might be similar to that one. The attributes on this page are organized by groups, and so you can define attributes that are cost or non-cost related. Some are pretty global to all projects in the system, like an ID and when it was imported and who did it, down to more specific attributes that are even specific to perhaps project type. So here we've got a building, so things like foundation type, exterior skin, and so forth are important to me in this type of project. Icons are available at the top to allow you to do various things with the information. I'll be referencing that stuff as you go around, but I just want to highlight where to focus your attention here as we move around in the demonstration. Cost elements, again, a hierarchy of your selected cost element structure. Here I'll expand this systems list or uniformat in that case, and as I expand through the hierarchy, we can see that we have quantity type information, unit cost information, percent of total, other fields are available, and these levels are all supported by detailed line items. And as you can see, there's parentheses after each one of these descriptions. Those parentheses just tell me how many line items are in that grouping supporting those various values. So in addition to expanding the list globally or collapsing it globally, these little arrows will let me drill right down in. So here I'm on A2020, walls for subgrade enclosures. I can either double click this row or use any of these icons up here that allow me to open more detailed information. So down below, I have the 5 line items that represent these various roll-ups, including quantities, hours, production rates, the balance between direct and indirect costs, if I want to represent those as well. And in reference to those direct and indirect costs, this pie chart in your information window can actually change depending on what kind of information you'd like to display. So that's usually helpful in the boardroom when you're trying to present clean and concise information. The links is actually attachments and references to associated project information. As you can see, I've got quite a few files listed here. Some of these files have been defined as thumbnails, and those thumbnails are what you see as you scroll through the information panel's pictures here on the left. You can also set up links to, let's say, your internal document control systems, if you would like to reference those for any project-associated files. I guess lastly on this, you can also even point to an internal server share. So if you have a folder on a T drive or something like that, you could reference that as well. Map feature, again, will plot the project on the map. And so that is a good overview of a single project view. I only bring it up because while looking at a single project, again, is nice, Cortex really operates in analyzing multiple sources of data, whether those be projects or cost elements or so forth. I'll take us back to the home page, and by clicking on the icon, that's how you get back to that home page. And so I'll go through and try to paint a few scenarios, examples, and general workflows that we see out there in our client base and in the industry. There are a couple different ways to get to the types of projects that you want to work with. We call those collections. Probably the most common is to use the projects classification list. So here I've defined in this particular demonstration environment a handful of different markets that I work in. And so by clicking on any one of these levels, the system will produce what we call a collection of projects. And similar to those cost element structures, the numbers in the parentheses behind these descriptions tell me how many projects are in that particular market. So clicking on parking structures will present to me a grid of projects. And these columns are actually those attributes that you saw. And I can rearrange these in any order I want. I can sort them by clicking on the headers. As you can see, that information panel is available to me here as well on the left. And as I cycle through the projects, that will respond to the project I'm interested in. Now, these are all parking structures. And so while it's good to have a global variable that, maybe I'm a building contractor and square foot is obviously the driving unit of measure. Perhaps by market segment or different types of projects, I would like to understand some different types of information. For example, in parking, I might want to go in, add the columns I have for a secondary size. And I even have a secondary size unit cost. And that size in the case of parking structures might be number of spaces. So here I have the number of spaces for each of the projects, and then a simple ratio field that will take the overall grand total amount and divide that by the number of spaces and give me a metric that I can normalize across all of my parking structures to get a nice understanding of the cost per unit for that particular kind of project. While looking at these projects in a grid is nice, and we even give you the capability to look at them in tile views similar to what you saw on the home page. I prefer the grid. It's a little more information there. I can make some easy decisions here about things. I might want to get to these projects in a different way. So the keyword search is very powerful. For example, I might want to look for all projects that are parking. And that represents a project type, but I could also type in maybe an engineer that I work with, and I want to see all the projects that that engineer has been involved with. So really that keyword search will focus on many of these attributes to take you where you want to go. But let's look at it real simple, and let's go into parking, and that will return, again, just a collection of the results of that search. As you can see, there's a few more projects in here. We know those aren't necessarily projects that come from my parking market, but somehow they are related to parking. And so I can see a few things very quickly here about these projects. A couple of them are actually templates. And as an aside, we provide those templates to you with the baseline configuration. They're helpful in starting things, and it gets you a head start in populating your project history database. So those are nice. But for my cost study here, I don't necessarily want to see them. So I can check those and remove them from my, must have hit something wrong there. Remove them from my list. I can see that this downtown Sheraton hotel podium over parking also has been presented to me here. And none of these other projects probably have a podium and retail space and so forth. Certainly the cost would reflect that, so I might take that out of my collection as well. So very easy to modify the list and get it to a subset of projects that you're interested in. And while there's a fair amount of capability here in analytics, including charts and so forth, sending it out to Excel so I can do something with it offline, Cortex 365 has a compare feature, which allows me to select two or more projects and compare them side by side. Very powerful view. And as you can see now, I've taken those projects and I've lined those up as columns. Hovering over those provides me again with that additional information that I might find helpful. I have the attributes view, the elements view, the map view, and the only view you're not seeing that you saw before were the links. And so we're not really comparing those. You need to see the links. You could open up any of these projects in single project view and go and reference those. But here on the attributes view, we can do things like expand and collapse a list. So if I want to focus on some financial information, I can do that. Very easily compare those. Site characteristics, number of floors, other project characteristics that might be important for me. That same kind of experience is available in the cost elements view. Again, I have all of my cost elements already rolled up. I can expand those globally, or again, I can drill down into the element levels and quickly see by, let's say, values that are missing, just means that that probably wasn't in the scope of that project. So it's a very nice view to see if I'm comparing apples and apples in my comparison. The elements comparison view, right now I'm showing one column here, that's just unit cost, but you can show up to 5 different cost columns. I didn't turn them all on right away because it can make a very busy screen, but you have the ability, again, through this configure grid to choose multiple compare columns. And there are all of those things such as direct and indirect costs that you can turn on and off. But I can also turn on statistical information. And here I'm going to turn on a statistic column. Let's just take that one for my unit cost and look at a simple average unit cost across all of my cost elements. Now, when I expand and collapse any of these, I can very quickly see what my unit costs are in terms of an average. And very, very simplistic standpoint, that provides me with a conceptual budget number based on my history. Those statistic columns are also available on the attributes. So any numerical type of information, whether it be quantity-based or cost-based, can also be viewed turning on any of these statistic columns. These are your usual suspects of average, high and low, a median, a spread, or a difference. Spreads are nice, obviously, if you're doing a variance report between two projects. I'll give you a simple standard deviation. It's a first standard deviation and a total. I'm going to leave average on there just to kind of demonstrate that. So here we can see my average spaces and costs and durations and so on and so forth. Well, since all of these projects were built at different periods of time, I hover over them, I can see they were also developed in different locations. One of the main capabilities of a project history database is the ability to normalize this information. With Cortex 365, we have the ability, and we give you the ability to normalize across location and time. So here I'm looking at some preset samples, but as you can see, I can choose different years. Certainly we want to typically normalize to current year. The tables that support these factors can be managed by the administrator. It's not something that you have to necessarily go to Eos for. You can support that with really any source you want. The usual suspects of RS mean, city cost index, and historical cost index are pretty straightforward, inexpensive, if not free. However, you can contribute really with any location and time-based factors you desire. Future years can be represented by escalation amounts, again, based on any economic data you may want to reference internally or outsource. Location lists available, as you can see, by a dropdown. And it's important to note that those fields that are associated or attributes with any of the projects are the baseline or the basis for those factor tables. So typically when you publish, those are going to be required fields. Somebody publishing a project just can't leave those blank, or that lets the system sort of fall apart. So part of the configuration is making sure you're defining fields that are required for publishing. Nonetheless, based on those baseline values factored from the rates in the tables, you'll see that every project is going to be represented with a different factor. If in the case of this 1600 pen project, it's already in Boston, so nothing's going to happen to it in terms of location factoring. If I want to calculate and visualize the overall factor that'll be represented as a cross-section of those two values, I can do that as well. Applying those means that all of the data for these projects, the attributes, the cost elements, and so forth, in terms of cost will be factored. We'll visually indicate that with a yellow band at the top, giving you the year, and of course the location that those are factored to. Now that conceptual estimate exercise makes a little bit more sense, a little more valid in that I've normalized these unit costs or totals or whatever kind of data I want to show here on my view. As mentioned before, we use map feature to pin those on the map if interested. By the way, we can support this typically with Google Maps. However, Microsoft Maps can also be used. So conceptual estimating, very simple exercise. However, benchmarking also is a major capability of project history systems. So let's look at a different scenario. Let's assume that I'm in an estimating department and I'm working with a client at the early stages of a negotiation, and I've produced an early stage estimate. We want to see how that estimate compares with the projects that are in my database. Many organizations will only publish projects that they consider the gold standard that users will compare to. So it might be part of your process that any early stage estimate has to be analyzed against your history to make sure it passes the sniff test. So I'm going to right mouse click, kind of a common technique I'm sure you've all used, and I'm going to open up the home page in a new tab. Let's close that document share system here. So I've taken the system back to the home page. The reason I did that is I just want to leave my project comparison available so I can reference back to it. And I'm going to go into this menu here, and I'm choosing project import and updates. And I'm going to go out into my system and select a new project, new garage that I'm putting together, and import that project into the system. Kind of a two-step process here. We import it first, and then we publish it. That publishing process goes through and validates the project. It makes sure that all the required fields have been entered, make sure the cost structures are in good shape, and so forth. If it does that, then I have that project imported. In fact, I'll click on it, and here it is in single project view. We provide in that import template the capability to actually attach pictures, so it came through with those. But I can always attach more documents and so forth by just going into the links tab. Great, so I have my new project in the system. In fact, I think because I want to use it in other views, I'll go ahead and add it to the clipboard. As you can see, my clipboard now has one project in it. We'll go back to my comparison. This is an internet browser, so there's kind of a few different kinds of capabilities, or let's call them workarounds, that you have to live with, such as this browser page doesn't know anything about that new project yet, so I'll refresh it. And by refreshing it, it doesn't really do anything visually other than now it knows that that project I published is now in the clipboard. These projects that are in the clipboard or in favorites now can be used in the comparison. And I can click and drag it right into the comparison. And a couple different ways I can do this. If I put it over here to the right, it will become part of these 5 projects, and therefore my average would include its numbers. But if I want to isolate it and compare it with some statistical analysis against those comparators, I can drag it here to the left of that hard vertical line. And it'll create what we call a baseline project. So now that project is included here on the left of the hard line. These averages, in fact, do not include the Smoke Glen parking project. Let's go ahead and minimize that clipboard, get a little more screen real estate. So we provide you with some statistics columns that allow you to evaluate the compare project against the comparators. And these are your baseline to stat columns. So now as I go down the list, and by the way, all the projects are factored. So this is a 2020 project. It doesn't have any time-based factoring, but it did base it by location. So certainly it's apparent that in Minneapolis, it's quite a bit less expensive to build than in Boston, according to Meads. But this baseline to average column now tells me how that project compares to the others. And immediately, with just a handful of elements, I can see that we're quite a bit high in some areas, really low in others. Maybe we compare favorably due to the design in others. But while that's very easy to see with just a handful of elements rolled up to the top level, by drilling down into a lot of detail, that may be harder to isolate. And so using Cortex's charting capabilities, which I pointed out, at least mentioned them a few times here, we'll go ahead and take a look at them because they really are quite helpful in analyzing your data. So here I'm going to go into a chart. See if I can get this clipboard minimized. There we go. We have several charts for you to choose from, even a couple different flavors of some of these charts. On the cost element view, which is what we're in, we'll give you these bar charts and a couple different flavors, as I mentioned. We can look at it as columns or rows. We're isolating the actual cost element structure. So you can see here, by clicking on grand total, we're looking at all of these elements collectively, everything in the system. And I've isolated the direct cost field and the indirect cost fields to be my stacked chart sections. And as I hover over those, you can see I've got a direct cost and an indirect cost represented for the baseline project, which will always be first in bar charts, as well as those of the comparator set. Now, group charts are pretty nice because what we're going to do is actually expand on the cost element structure and provide for each one of the cost element levels a bar representing each one of the projects. So across all my cost elements, we can immediately see where the projects stand in respect to the others. So we noticed back just looking at the grid data that my shell costs were really high compared to the others. And so if I wanted to explore that further, I could always drill down into shell. And now we're just looking at the children of shell, which are the 3 uniform at level 2s, and stacking those in a chart respectively. So that is a bar chart, pretty nice and useful. Any of these charts, by the way, you can right mouse click, you can copy that image, meaning take that image and put it in a report or an off-sheet document of some kind. The 100% chart simply represent my cost, again, wherever I'm focused, in this case on the grand total. That'll pick up all my indirect and direct costs and just represent it as a ratio of the whole. And it makes sense in an early stage estimate that I might have a lot more indirect costs that might contain some contingency and so forth. In fact, you might even see a lot more. You know, it's common to see a 50% contingency in some of these early stage estimates, but bar charts really let you see that well. Pie charts just pick a single data type, hours, cost per unit, and so forth. And then the high-low chart is one of my favorites. I think visually it helps isolate data very well, as good as bar charts, if not better. But what we're doing here for my projects across all of them and the cost element structures is we're identifying immediately not only the high and the low in the range of the whisker chart here, and those just represent those 5 comparators, and where my new project lands in respect to those. So again, you can see that my shell costs are well outside of the high and low range. That lets me immediately explore further. What is it about this project that's driving that? I may be able to drill down into cost element data and see what that is exactly, or different than, estimating systems, different than project control systems. The use of attributes to tell us something about these projects without having to wade through detail is really the power of the system. You go back to the attributes in this case and very quickly see some relationships. I'm going to turn off the charts here, and I'm going to roll this back up because I want to look at those project characteristics. And we can see here an exterior skin type that this particular garage has a lot of curtain wall, glass and glazing. The projects here are precast or composite, much less expensive. So that saves you from perhaps wading through a lot of supporting documentation to understand something about the project. Lastly, as I mentioned a couple times here, you have the ability to take all of this out to Excel. I'm going to export, I can just do this view. What you see is what you get, essentially, or I can export all of these compare views. What we'll do here in Cortex 365 is provide you with a fairly nicely formatted output with a tab for each one of those views, attributes and elements. We'll group these for you so you can roll them up and isolate as you need to. Same thing with the cost elements. We got 4 levels here, so you can roll up as needed. We'll keep that factoring information so you can see that easily, as well as any of the graphical tiles that came with those projects. Very good. Well, that is a general overview of some capabilities working at the project level. And I'd like to conclude the demonstration with isolating the data, coming at it from a different angle, perhaps for a purpose that's different than looking at things from that project level. So let's clean house a little bit here and remove the factoring. I'll go back to the home page and let's start fresh and paint a new scenario. Let's say, again, I'm an estimator. My organization does some self-perform work across some of the trades, and I'm interested in evaluating my new estimate to see what my history says about production rates that we've done on projects in the past. Cortex 365 lets you really dive into the cost elements regardless of the projects they're associated with. And that's this icon up here, and that takes you into the element library. So in effect, for the uniformatter systems, again, as I mentioned before, you can choose one between master format, uniformat, or perhaps your own internal cost structure if it's well organized and ready for that. And you can grow into that, by the way. But as you can see, across this uniformat, I've got cost elements across my entire database. So I don't really care what project it is, in essence. I just want to see how we're doing on labor production rate at a global level for, let's say, interior superstructure, that skeleton of the structure. I've got 34 cost elements represented in the system. And there they all are, given to me in a collection of cost elements. So different than a collection of projects, we have a collection of cost elements. But the behavior, the charting, the capabilities are really the same. It's just that you're not dealing with project level data, you're dealing with item level data. So here we have quantities and costs and so forth that represent those line items. And I can turn on additional columns in here that reference things like hours and hours per quantity. So because I'm focusing on production, I've turned those columns on, and again, I can sort these top to bottom, but as your history database grows, of course, this will get into the thousands. And so wading through graphical data like this, grid data like this, can be very hard to understand any kind of trends from this information, let alone whether the superstructure is the same amongst all these buildings. I mean, already I can see some of these projects have lump sum costs and quantities. They don't make much sense. I don't know, maybe those were hard bid projects. I couldn't get the granular detail I could in some of the other projects out. So we've introduced the capability to filter. And here, maybe I'm looking for, I don't know, the project I'm working on is, I want everything that's at least 100,000 square feet. And so now my list has been filtered down to include 23 elements and 23 projects. Much more manageable list. Maybe suits the study I'm trying to work on much better. But still, there could be more than 23, there could be hundreds. And so I'm going to focus in on a chart here, which is a scatter chart, very useful chart. Of course, gets us into another level of statistics, still simple stuff, but picture tells 1,000 words. So as you probably know, we have two variables, they're independent variables, and we want to understand a relationship between let's say a driving variable like quantity and what effect it has on a dependent variable such as production rate. And as I look at all this data plotted here, I visually just can't see much of a trend. And that could be because my data is bad, which is one problem. That comes down to your database management and data quality and so forth. but it could also be because I'm comparing apples and oranges. So how do I understand if I'm comparing apples and oranges? One of the features we've implemented is the ability to actually isolate that by virtue of those project characteristics. There's a link here that says 23 elements and 23 projects. If I click 23 projects, I come back right to that project collection, only it's focused on those superstructure items, it's those projects that I was keyed in on. And now I can use the project filtering to say, I'm interested in steel structures. And now when I run back and take a look at those cost elements, we've even isolated the list further to just projects that are relevant for what I'm trying to do. Hopefully that scatter chart presents me with something that perhaps looks a little bit more statistically relevant. Now, this is a very simple chart, but I can see already that there's a relative trend in my data. If I'm interested in exploring data points, what project is that? I can hover over it. It tells me the project. It tells me some of the value data that I'm interested in. In fact, you can see this point down here at the very bottom. While it has a value for quantity, it doesn't look like it has any hours. And sure enough, that's our Smoke Glen project. Very early conceptual estimate, didn't have any hours. But since it's plotted here, it's definitely affecting my data. And so you can click on that and actually remove it from the entire list. Cortex 365 will recast the data. And now I can use this information predictably, hopefully accurately, or at least let me pass that sniff test of whether the values I have in my new estimate are reflective of my history. These are also very simple cost models in a sense. So if I wanted to use the number and tie that production in my estimate, let's assume that my new project is a 300,000 square foot project. I would expect that my value for production rate should be somewhere in the 0.15 hours per square foot range. So you could use that number just to conceptually estimate an isolated cost element in addition to, like I showed you earlier, an entire project. So that concludes the demonstration portion of the webinar. And so with that, I would like to turn it back over to Madeline for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If the questions lead us to needing to come back to Cortex, I will be happy to do that. But I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Madeline, for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Tony. As Tony said, we're going to take some questions now. So if anyone hasn't submitted a question and would like to, please go ahead and ask it. We do have one question that is, can you drill down into master format?
Sure. And I realize I was, keying on uniformat, but we provide you with the option of choosing one cost element structure in your system. Now, while that may seem limiting, I'll guarantee you that there's a lot to consider in putting a history database together. And early on, trying to isolate a single cost structure and make that consistent across every project you plan on publishing to the system, it is enough of a challenge, but you do have your choice. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I know your tiles on your console allow you to move these around if you want to see the slide again or something like that. But I'll go ahead and drill in on a single project if you like. Madeline, can you see my screen again?
Yeah, we're all set.
Okay. So here I'll just go back to this project, cost elements. And in this case, instead of uniformat, I'll choose the master format. So here I have my level 1, drill down, level 2, and here are my line items.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Can you go back to the cost slide, the investment slide for 365?
Sure. Now I'm still screen sharing for everyone. I believe you can minimize that view and look at the investment slide if you like, but I'd like to keep the screen sharing in case any other questions maybe come up.
Next question, how do I set up with a demo account using my own data to test drive the software?
Well, good question. I'll offer this. That's something we have done in the past for Cortex project history, the enterprise project. Due to the price point of 365 and the templates we provide, we're trying to limit the pre-purchase or sales process and you know, not have to spend too much time up front with that. If it's imperative that you do that, I can try to do that on a case-by-case basis, but you know, anticipating a fairly high volume of clients and customers, that may be difficult for us to do for every case. But if you want to reach out and contact us, we have a contact slide here we can show at the end and discuss that in further detail.
Great, thank you, Tony. The next question is, what reports are available?
So the reporting is you know, something I've demonstrated through Excel exports. Just about every view I showed you, meaning you can turn on the columns you want, you can, you know, show charts, you can do things like this and export that information out to Excel or copy paste those images out into supporting documentation. I guess, you know, lastly, I would offer that you can also export what we call flat project data. Now, flat project data is actually quite powerful, and we realize that maybe not every view or every view that you want to export to Excel is checking the box for you in terms of reporting, that you may want to either have custom reports or use tools like Tableau, Power BI, and so on and so forth. We've provided an output from Cortex 365 that flattens all of the data for the projects you're viewing. So here I'm showing 3 projects. If I export this flat project data view, you will get a predictable workbook that flattens all the data that can be used by really any system. So whether that reporting is a pre-baked Excel workbook, you could simply drop this export into the same folder, reference it in your report. That capability is even more powerful in something like Power BI or Access reports. You just choose your cost structure, and we will export this not only with all of the cost elements down to the items, but also the attributes. So here's my project level information columns, uniform at levels 1, 2, and 3. So you can go query that data as needed.
Great, thank you, Tony. Next question is, can you explain the implementation approach?
Yeah, so we tried to boil it down to you know, a predictable, standardized approach. We start with what we call initial or implementation owner training. The focus is for the person who's responsible in your organization to put this all together. And we'll use demonstration data similar to what you're seeing here to give you in-depth training on the platform. And as we do that, we'll reference the things you can change, the things you can't necessarily affect, so that you can make decisions through the process of configuring it to suit your needs. Then we go through a process of either providing mock-ups or helping you change field names, add new fields, delete fields, so on and so forth, again, to you know, represent your own project data. That's complemented with some publishing processes. So how do you prepare your data to publish? How you publish it? We evaluate those sample projects that you've published. We tweak the system. And once it's acceptable to you, we finish the implementation with detailed administrator training and really give you, the keys of the castle and make you an administrator of the system. That's not training that everybody needs, but certainly a few individuals in your organization who are going to be responsible for maintaining that history database.
Great, thank you. Next question has to do with publishing, translating sources to import template, direct publishing, etc.
Okay. I'll read that as what does it take to get my data into Cortex through publishing? I did show you the process of dragging or picking a file, and certainly that file has to conform to the needs of Cortex. And what we've done is we've stored the import template in Excel format in the database. So if you have the rights, the permissions to publish in Cortex, i.e. you're the administrator, and by the way, that administrator license is a concurrent license, just meaning if you had two administrators, they could both log into the system, just not at the same time, but that just means, you could publish. You could also distribute this template to others to fill out, and then the administrator could publish it after the fact. But getting the template is straightforward. We store it, like I said, in the database. It's important to store it in the database because if the configuration ever changes, whether you do something minor like, change a field name or whatever, the template also changes. So standardized import template, pretty straightforward, simple. Here we have an empty template. You can enter a narrative, a project summary if you'd like. This is a new parking garage. Any fields with an asterisk are required by the system. So this is where I was telling you how you control the quality of your data. Name. Project type. So any fields that have been defined as list values, again, this helps your data quality. So things like project type, I don't want one user to enter, government buildings and another user to enter government BLDGS, because to Cortex or any database system, those are different values. So it's very important that this is a very managed process. And units, all this kind of stuff, so on and so forth. That's all your attribute information. As you can see, we've got a list here. Any gray boxes are just fields that are calculated. Then there's the item data. And the item data are item fields. However you prepare your data, you would need to match this target, but copying and pasting from that's usually not too hard to do for folks used to using Excel. Typically you might have some kind of, let's say an Excel workbook with all this detail and it's in your format, and, how do I get that thing into Cortex? Well, typically that's just a matter of, referencing the cells in the order that you need to, things like that. Maybe having a back sheet that consolidates it the way you need it to. And you've got that all ready to go. And then you can come back into your template, paste those values. And of course, when you publish, Cortex will make sense of all of this, right? It'll create those organizational values and things like that. So I'll save this. Let's make sure there's my import template. I think I probably missed a few fields. Let's put this in, Point Pleasant, New Jersey. All right, we got all those done. Go back to Cortex. Let's see if this works. Kind of flying by the seat of my pants here a little bit, but probably good to show you that.
We are going to have to wrap it up soon. Sorry.
Understood. So here's your new project. So it can be pretty straightforward once you get that data in place.
It looks like we don't have any other questions at this time, and we did hit our time limit. So I want to thank you all for your interest and attention today. I would also like to reiterate our thanks to Tony. And we have put up a slide with our contact information. And again, this recording will be sent to you if you want to watch it again. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.